I'd like to welcome you today to the 23rd Annual Child Welfare Conference sponsored by the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare in the School of Social Work at the University of Minnesota. My name is Dr. Tracy Laliberte, and I'm the Executive Director for the Center, which you may also hear people refer to as CASCW throughout the day. I'd like to acknowledge that our university and the land on which we are located is the unceded, traditional, ancestral, and contemporary land of Dakota people, who are the first people of Minnesota Makoche. By offering the land acknowledgement, we affirm tribal sovereignty and work to hold the university, ourselves, our learners, our partners, accountable to American Indian peoples and nations. We also acknowledge slavery's deep roots and recognize the significant role that captive and free African Americans have played in building our country. This is the second part of our conference. Yesterday was the first part, wildly well attended. We were so pleased to have so many people from different disciplines, different states, 33 states, I think, and several countries attend. So we're really looking forward to continuing that conversation again today. Let's take a moment and just see who is all here today. I see we've got about 350 folks who are logged on. Crystal, do you want to put up the poll? In a moment, you're going to see a poll go onto your screen. If you could quickly answer that, it will let us know everybody who's here and the different disciplines that are represented. Just to give people a sense of who's interested in participating in these really critical conversations around supporting the collaboration between birth and foster parent relationships. Okay, I'm going to be honest. I'm not controlling the poll, so I don't know when the answers, oh, there's the answers. They're going to pop up. So as we would expect, as the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare, the majority of our attendees are from child protection or foster care. But we have tribal caseworkers, private agency folks, supervisors and managers, guardian ad litems, birth families, resource families, and then a host of people who click other. So thank you for doing that. I think it just kind of gives everybody a little perspective as we're asking questions and answering questions, who's all in the room, so to speak. I'm going to take just a moment to thank the outreach staff of CASCW. It's, as you can imagine, a fairly Herculean task to get not only one virtual conference going, but to have two days back to back. They've worked very, very hard. And they've also worked on the development of our CW 360 publication. That is an electronic publication that will be sent to everybody registered, and hard copies are also available. That publication will support upwards of maybe 30, 40 articles related to supporting collaborative birth and foster parent relationships in the field of child welfare. Things that caseworkers can do, things that private practitioners can do to support these relationships. So please be on the lookout for that. It will be sent to you this summer. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Stacy Gehring, who is the Director of Outreach for CASCW.
Good afternoon. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm Stacy Gehringer, the Director of Outreach. Really excited for our conference lineup today. There are just quite a few logistics we'll just cover right away, and we'll remind folks in the chat. CEUs will be emailed out to attendees within a week of this conference. The conference will be recorded, and it will also be posted to our CASCW website. Presenter PowerPoint slides, if they've provided them, will be posted to our website. Because we have more than 750 registrants for today's conference, we are unable to host a virtual chat. However, we will be using the Q&A to answer questions for 2 of the 4 presentations today. We do encourage engagement in many other ways. So we will provide the contact information for each presenter, CASCW is open to emails from participants, and please engage via social media, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. I'll put the hashtag in the chat. And then finally, in terms of the Q&A, we would like to funnel all of the questions through there. So they will be addressed at the end of each session. And we might have some limited time for questions, but we'll do our best to get to them. We will create a parking lot Google Doc for questions we aren't able to get to, and hope that the presenters will be able to answer some of those questions for folks. So I'm going to move on to introductions. And the agenda for today is on the screen. This conference will go to 4 o'clock Central Time. And so you can see here kind of what's in store. Our first presentation is a panel representing the Quality Parenting Initiative in Minnesota, also known as QPI Minnesota, which we referred to several times yesterday if you attended the conference. This panel is entitled Relationships as a Resource, Improving Outcomes for Youth, Families, and Our Communities. Individuals, audience members will walk away from this panel with inspiration and strategies QPI Minnesota is using to cultivate connection between caregivers, parents, youth, and professionals. Panelists include Shanna King and Carmela Hines. Darlene Bell, a foster parent in Minnesota, was unable to attend for the panel today. And the session will be moderated by Kate Rickard. Shanna is a racial equity leader with QPI Minnesota and a parent mentor at the Indian Child Welfare Center in Minneapolis. She is an enrolled member of MHA Nation in North Dakota. Carmela Hines supports foster families, children, and young people as a licensing worker for Family Alternatives in Minnesota. Carmela is a former young person in foster care and transracial adoptee. Kate is a founding leader in the QPI Minnesota efforts and works to elevate the voice of lived experience individuals for system change. So before we hear from the panel, we're going to hear first from Kirsten Anderson, who's the executive director of Aspire Minnesota. And she's just going to share a brief overview of the story of QPI Minnesota as it relates to policy and legislation. Welcome, Kirsten.
Thank you so much, Stacy, and thank you to the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare and to all of you for your commitment to these conversations, for your commitment to enhancing practice to support kids and families across the state of Minnesota. And today, thank you for your interest in Quality Parenting Initiative Minnesota. I love this story, and so I'm so delighted to share this with you. And just to speak a minute about Aspire Minnesota. Aspire Minnesota is a statewide association of children's service providers, and in that role, we support the member organizations and child and family serving entities across the state in the areas of policy, research, outcome evaluation, and leadership development. So again, it's a great pleasure to be with you today and to share a bit about that QPI Minnesota story. So I'm going to try to be brief, but I am quite enthusiastic. So if I go on, someone can nudge me. So QPI was discovered by St. David Center originally out of the Youth Law Center in California. Those of you who were here yesterday heard a great deal about some of those stories from Executive Director Jennifer Rodriguez herself. And as they discovered QPI, they were both inspired by the leaders, and then they came and brought that inspiration back to our community-based foster care organizations, asking the question, how could we bring QPI to Minnesota? And in that dialogue, there was a lot of mutual, both inspiration and reluctance, because oftentimes QPI, or exclusively, QPI has been a mandated reform in other states and jurisdictions. And so the notion that we would simply voluntarily begin this movement, initiate this foster care reform, was a little bit outlandish. And so everyone needed to be a little bit loved into the equation. But as the story goes, when it was launched out of greater heft in the inspiration column than in the reluctance is going to work column, it brought together a whole vast constituency, likely many of you in this conversation today, who are inspired by how it is that we might be able to build this reform in the state of Minnesota. And in naming the values around honoring our birth families, around honoring our foster families, around honoring young people, and all of us engage in these conversations, focusing on those primary knowledge holders and those with experience, that has really driven us forward. So out of those value propositions and sense of what we could do together, QPI Minnesota was launched. And as we set that runway, that momentum has simply begun to build and continues to build as that practice demonstrates the real value of what this panel is all about today, the establishment of relationships for the care of children. And the great, inspiring, and so grounded proposition of quality parenting, that the best practice that we can give kids and families is indeed loving parenting. So those values established and launched us and continues to sustain that momentum. And, quality parenting is primarily practice. As Katie Byron shared yesterday, we cannot wait for policy to make changes. So part of what I was asked to do today is speak to the policy implications. And so part of the wonderful part of QPI is that we're not waiting for policy, because all of you here know that policy sometimes takes so long and is definitely a lagging indicator of success in our movements and reforms. And so QPI is really about that practice element. And as part of our work within the wider QPI discussion, Representative Rena Moran, who is a champion for so many beautiful things for kids, families, and communities, she came into the equation and said, you know what, I am very invested in the values of QPI, and particularly the foundational step of that initial call or that comfort call. And so out of her leadership, she brought together all that are needed to make policy change and establish comfort calls as part of our practice in the state of Minnesota, requiring that at the time of placement that a call be placed to the birth parent and establish a positive relationship based on the care of the child at that time for growth into the future. And as we have seen tremendous value in establishing the comfort call, we've also found in that teaching and learning the importance of technical assistance and training. Because as we heard from Erica Lewis's research yesterday, in our striving to prioritize connection over compliance, the power of personal narrative is a critical component for incentivizing participation and inspiring commitments. She particularly found in the power of training and technical assistance that QPI holds great promise for strengthening foster care because it acknowledges perspectives of birth and foster parents and explicitly focuses on equitable participation in the process. So this is one of the findings that we have arrived at, that training and technical assistance are critical. And part of that is simply the handing on of those personal narratives, that we know that making these practice changes does make a huge difference, and that it makes a difference both for the child and family and for the system. And so there is upside for everyone, but it's a little bit challenging to believe in that until you experience it yourself, or you have that story handed to you in that loving way that we can offer with training and technical assistance. So as a result of all of that, we do have another minor policy event happening in the state of Minnesota as it relates to quality parenting initiative, in that there is an appropriation that's being supported by both House and Senate Human Service omnibus bills right now that would include some resources for QPI Minnesota to continue this growth trajectory with a focus on technical assistance and training. So we continue to be very hopeful about that. And with that, I will conclude my enthusiastic offering of the initial story about Quality Parenting Initiative and hand the mic to Director of Quality Parenting Initiative Minnesota, Kate Rickard.
Hi, thanks, Kirsten. We are very excited today to talk about QPI. For those of you who did not have the opportunity to listen to Executive Director Jennifer Rodriguez or Erica Lewis share her insight and research, I just will help ground us a little bit in what QPI is really about. The core principles are about relationships. If there is a service that we could provide for youth and families who are involved in the child protection and foster care system, it would be that of meaningful relationships and quality parenting. Another one is that our policy and practice is based on research. You know, if you think about what we know and continue to learn about child development, the role of attachment, security, you know, what happens with adversity, we want to be able to use that developmental research as a grounding foundation to why we make decisions. And then the third would be those who have been most impacted by a system are also the ones who can generate the best solutions for that system. And so that's really what QPI is all about in the various ways. I am super excited for Shauna and Carmela to join and for you to be able to hear from them. They are a few of my favorite people. And I am bummed for all of you that Darlene Bell wasn't able to join. She has a vibrancy that leaves you with like, I think I could do something about this, which we will do our best through Shauna, Carmela, and myself to give that to you. And so I have just one ask as we kind of ground ourselves before getting into some, tactical strategies and inspiration, is that yesterday, Chandra talked about an invite to be bold and brazen. And I would like to create an invite today for you to think about, how can I be curious and caring? What goes into what are the right ingredients for me to be able to show up in that way with curiosity and with care? And so without any more introduction, I would love to bring Shauna and Carmela on to the screen so that we can continue on. All right. Hello, friends. It's good to see you. Hi. So my first introduction to Shauna was back in 2019 when one of the foster families I was working with had attended the Birth and Foster Parent Partnership Strategic Convening. And they came back and they're like, you have got to meet this person. And so I kind of cold called and was like, Shauna, I'd love to meet you for coffee. I hope you're willing to. And she was, and they were so right for why I and QPI needed to connect with Shauna. So Shauna, if you would just do like a little intro about yourself and kind of what brought you to join these QPI efforts, and if there's anything that stands out to you as part of that.
Sure. Adosha, hello. Me, it's Madakabe Hova Mia. My name is Holy Owl Woman, and my English given name is Shauna King. And you're right, I still am a part of the Birth Foster Parent Partnership, and attended the first meeting there. And I sit on the BPAC, which is the Birth Parent Advisory Committee for Casey Family Programs. And they kind of tied us into that meeting right afterwards. And, when we first thought about it, I remember my experience. I'm a birth mom who has been a kid in foster care, and then also had her kids in foster care successfully united. I thought about my experiences and I thought, this is not going to work. Foster parents don't care. They don't build relationships. I don't talk to any of the 4 different foster homes that I lived in 4 years, and didn't have a good relationship with the foster parents that my kids were in home with. But the more I attended the meetings and learned about it and met foster parents who build those relationships, I believe Darlene was one of them. I'm sad she couldn't be here today. It amazed me about, like, if all foster families thought like that, what a difference that would have made in my life as a child and as an adult, and what a difference it would have made in my children's lives, and how I could possibly still have like family, because I'm an Indigenous person. And as you know, I come from generational and historical trauma. And a lot of that ties into relationships and family and keeping healthy relationships in my life. And unfortunately, it wasn't a healthy space for me to have my birth family in my life. So, being able to have built those relationships with foster homes would have been instrumental in my life, and probably would not have caused as much traumas that have happened in my future as far as having my kids there. So I guess once I started going to those meetings, it all clicked. And then I saw you on screen, Kate, talking about how you guys were working here. And I'm like, how can I get this in ICWA? I work at the ICWA Law Center. How can we implement this into the space that I'm in? Because it makes sense. The families that I'm working with could really use this support in their lives. And they could also take that burden of, there's a whole nother person who's judging me and my kids off of my back. So it just made sense for me to advocate for it, and then to have it to be a part of the Indigenous community here in Minnesota.
Thank you. And then our other panelist today is Carmela. And I have to say the dedication that Carmela has been showing to our youth voice leaders is fierce and on fire. They've had presentations in March, both for a national webinar with the Youth Law Center, as well as the annual conference at the MSSA here in Minnesota. And it has been such a lovely journey to watch you. But I would love if you would just introduce yourself and kind of what, entering the QPI Minnesota space looked like and how that experience has been for you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kate, for that. And that is a hard intro to follow from Shauna. She is an amazing woman. And I'll echo what she said. I'm kind of sad Darlene Bell won't be joining us today, but I think we will be able to share lots of information and resources with you all. I entered my entry to QPI was about almost 4 years ago in 2018 when I became a licensing worker at Family Alternatives. And I kind of jumped right into the work with QPI, learning about what it is. I attended my first conference, QPI National Conference in Philadelphia, and got to meet tons of people and hear so many stories and learn so much from everyone who was doing QPI already on the East Coast. And I was like, we got to do this in Minnesota. We got to figure out how we can continue this work here in Minnesota. And then I was asked to be a co-lead supporting adult on a youth-led action work group for youth and young people who have experienced foster care in the state of Minnesota. And so I've been doing that work now with those youth for almost 4 years. And we've taken breaks due to COVID, like I'm sure many other things have had to take breaks on. But I'm so, like Kate said, it's been amazing this year to be able to speak at the MSSA conference here in Minnesota. It's been great to speak at the QPI National webinar that we hosted. And and just the youth are experts of their own lives, and hearing their voice is super important. And as social workers and people in the field, getting to hear their voice firsthand and then making a change in how we practice is so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Camilla. And I love that, it's not just about hearing the voice, but then what am I going to do with it? They can't just stop at, I heard something without action. And I know one of the things when we talk about QPI strategies, we're always trying to center ourselves back to that parenting piece, right? So we know that kids are at the center of the work and really believe if we can support parents, then we're ultimately going to have better outcomes and experience and healing for our children and our families. So I'm just wondering if either of you would be willing to jump in and share, an example or two about how focusing on the parents and that role of parenting using QPI practices has made a positive impact in your roles, either as like an individual or your role as a professional.
Shauna, I'll let you. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Shauna.
Yeah, sure. So I think when I first started doing the birth parent foster parent partnership, I didn't consider foster parents, of my kids at least. I was the parent. They were, the foster placement. Until I started working along with QPI more and getting more trained and learning about the relationships that could be built. I think that, understanding that it's best for the child to have both of those people in their lives that are, helping them with school, bedtime, whatever putting them to bed. Sorry about that. Just the regular needs of life. When a child is placed in foster care, a birth parent can't always do that. But if there's a relationship built there, that foster parent can involve the birth parent. They can have the birth parent on Zoom to read a book so that they could go to bed, and they could really share that role. And that's really what, will help alleviate that trauma from being in and out of home placement. It's not going to take away being removed, but it is going to help alleviate it. And it's going to help that child feel much safer. Okay, that my mom's still around, my dad's still there. And having both parents involved and for me, understanding that a foster parent is parenting my child at that time, or, the moms and dads that I work with, having to understand that, hey, this is somebody that's going to be, caring for your child and loving them and making sure that they're okay while you're working on the issues that brought you into the system in the first place, is just a good thing, right? It's the best practices, and being able to make sure that that child can understand that both of those parents have the best for them is, I think, critical in just in their life and in their growth, and being able to overcome that. I think if I would have had that as a child when I was in foster care, and my foster parents may have supported my mom, maybe I would have had a better relationship with her, because maybe she wouldn't have been so shamed. And that shame that comes with having your child removed from your care is pretty awful. Mm-hmm. And I never understood that until that happened to me. And having a foster parent understand that as well and support that parent, that birth parent, I believe is just helps with, I mean, everything about a case plan. It helps relieve that burden of who has my child, what are they doing, and then creating that relationship between the birth parent and foster parent can also help keep that bond intact when the child is in out of home placement. So I forgot what the question is, because I like to go on my little I don't know what you call them, my little spills, but yeah, so I think, like, having both parents involved is like the best outcome for that child. And that has to be birth parents and foster parents. It can't be just one or the other.
And I think what I really appreciate what you said, Shauna, and it's a little bit of a nuanced, but using the word parenting as a verb. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes we can get really, it's hard to think about it as like a specific role or a noun, but your comment was like, in this moment, they are parenting, but it doesn't, it creates a little bit of maybe space or opportunity for that to be present. Are you okay if I ask just one follow-up on that?
Of course.
So as your role as a birth parent mentor and, working with families in these times, especially in that beginning, right? Like thinking about that beginning of like this, is there any advice or kind of encouragement that you have with your other colleagues, right? Maybe caseworkers or lawyers or individuals of that nature to sort of help support their ability to then support the parent?
So the birth parent or the foster parent?
Either one.
Okay. Yeah, I think it would be important. I mean, obviously, depending on cases, but I think it's really important to support that relationship between both parents, to encourage a comfort call. A comfort call could make or break a case. Usually, people fall off after the first court case. So I feel like, if they have a space where they know their child's safe, where that foster family is like, hey, I just want you to know I support you. And I know that you're working on having your kids coming home, and I 100% support that. They're here in my home, and I just want to know, what do they like to eat? How do they like their hair done? What do they go to bed with? Is there anything they need to work on in school that you guys have been working on? And building that relationship to, like what I said before, hey, do you want to call around, 7:30 at night or 8 or whatever bedtime is and read them a book? I can put them on Zoom, or I can put you on the phone, and building that relationship up to, once the case closes, they might still keep in contact and support each other throughout life. So if a social worker or a judge or anybody who's coming into somebody's life through child protection could support that relationship in any way that they possibly could, that would be good. Maybe inviting foster parents to cases, if it's okay with the birth parent, being able to talk with them, maybe encouraging, instead of having strangers at a visitation, maybe having a foster parent there instead. I think that, anything that you can do to think outside of the box, or anything that maybe inside the box that's just kind of new and doesn't always feel right, can make a big change. And that relationship could make or break them coming back into the system as well, because they would have that extra support that they may not have had before.
Yeah, thank you. Camilla, I know you got ideas.
Yeah, I got tons of ideas. I didn't know. Sometimes it's okay to sit in the silence. So I didn't know if anyone was going to say anything after that. My head is running with tons of ideas. But the one thing I wanted to recircle back around to, I think that Kate shared with us at the beginning of the core values of QPI, relationships, right? That's the first one that she shared with us. And I hear Shauna talking about that right now. And it's about being in relationships with the families. And as a licensor, for myself, it's easy to walk with my foster families, my licensed foster families, whether it's a mom or a foster mom and a foster dad, or just one single foster parent, walking alongside them and helping them and giving them those examples that Shauna just said, giving them the examples of, are kids struggling at bedtime? Would it be better if they gave mom a call, or maybe mom could send a recording every single night of her voice? Could you show, being really creative and thinking outside of the box, right? We always talk about not every single, I don't like to call them cases, but not every single case is the same. Not every single family, not every single individual is the same. And so we really have to start thinking about what works for this family, what works for this child, what works for this mom, and being willing to be creative about that, right? So we're making that step at Family Alternatives, right? Because we don't have to have policy. It doesn't have to be in policy that we have to build relationships with our birth families, or to inform our families who are looking to be licensed with us that it has to be in policy. We tell them at the front end when they're coming in to be licensed, we value walking alongside our birth families. And so if you want to be licensed here at Family Alternatives, we're hoping that you can also hold that value too. And that's where it starts at. And I think that also helps build some of the negative things that have been in society about, the scariness of working for foster families, working with biological families, and people use different terms, right, to describe birth families. I typically say birth families, families of origin. So it just helps build that scariness right away, that it's not going to be scary for a mom or for a dad who is handling their own things to just say, I know where my children are. I think Chana brought up the comfort calls. I know we're going to talk more about that. I don't know if Kate, you want me to jump right into that, but
yeah.
Yeah. So comfort calls are a thing that we do here at Family Alternatives. As a social worker and a licensor who's working directly with our foster families, I could spend the rest of the time telling you tons of examples of comfort calls that we have, that our families do. And it's interesting to me that our families were doing comfort calls before it was in law, before we brought this to legislation. Our families were just doing this naturally. And it's interesting that, and I think many families were, right? Many families at different private agencies, county levels, they were doing comfort calls so naturally, but now it's like, oh, we have a name for it. Oh, this is part of process and part of a child is removed. They need to make a comfort call to mom or to grandma or whomever they were living with before, to talk about what soothes the child at night. Maybe what kind of foods does the child like to eat? What may they be struggling with in school that you can help them with? Those are things that comfort calls are about and for. I have a great example that I would love to share. We have a family licensed with Family Alternatives. Her name is Janelle Black, and she was a newborn baby girl was placed with her. And she came from a treatment center. The baby, she was in the treatment center with her mom. And unfortunately, mom relapsed and an injury happened. And that's what led to the baby girl being placed with Family Alternatives foster parent Janelle. And at first, Janelle didn't have the mom's contact info. And so she was not able to make that comfort call right away. But mom reached out to a Family Alternatives, our number, and got to speak with a staff member here who was able to provide Janelle with mom's phone number, mom's name, let mom also know, like, this is where baby's at. And she Janelle got to call mom and just say, hey, I want to learn some more about your daughter, your baby girl. This is not my child. This is your child. I want to, what helps soothe her? What helps, and she was a newborn. And so mom and Janelle, foster parent, were able to talk on the phone and share each other's phone numbers and names going forward. And one of the things that Janelle had shared with her licensor that I want to read is the first thing she told mom was, we're on the same team. And I just wonder how mom felt in that moment to hear the person taking care of her child saying that, I'm not against you. I don't want to shame you. We are on the same team. And because of you, I get to take care of this beautiful baby girl for a moment in her life and reunify her with you when you're ready. And so that's one thing that I just, like, it's giving me chills right now, even just to say that. And so baby girl has finally got to start some overnights with mom. And Janelle and mom continue to be in continuous communication, continuous conversations. And the plan is for Janelle to continue to support baby girl even when she returns home. And that is what Shauna was talking about there, right? The relationship is even supported after. It takes a village, and that is a real true saying. It takes a village for our children and our families. And I'll wrap up quickly. One other, I just want a direct quote from Janelle was, the first time she met mom, she texted this to her licensor. Oh my word, bio mom is just beautiful. The second she saw me, she gave me a very cheery big hug and thanked me so much. She spoke to me like she already knew me. And that just speaks to that relationship that Janelle and mom were able to talk to each other over the phone. It was amazing. So that's like an example of a comfort call, and I have tons more. So you can always share them. But that just touched me a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it is through that real human piece that we get to be inspired. And what we also know about a system is that they like to have some like data or facts that backs things up. And so one of the things that we've been participating in, and Jennifer kind of mentioned it yesterday, was around these quality parenting outreach surveys that the Youth Law Center, that national QPI, is doing. And with that, so we've got a few Minnesota sites doing it. And one of the data points that we found is that if that initial call is done at the beginning of a placement, foster parents are significantly more likely to believe they can partner with the parents for reunification and have that co-parenting relationship happen and feel successful in it than when that first contact point is made later. So as the days trickle by and that contact between parent and foster parent isn't made, there becomes less sort of like confidence that I'm going to be able to do this. And that's not what we want, right? Foster parents are there to support reunification. So let's equip them with that. You know, I think that's kind of a piece to sort of round that out. And there's a couple of things that you guys alluded to a little bit that I'd love to dig in on. So, you know, here in Minnesota, we have lots of farming communities. And so you see grain silos, you know, on the side of the road when you are traveling. And those type of silos are great. But the kind of silos that a lot of us have experienced in child welfare are not so useful to our communities. And so I would just really be interested in, you know, sort of some of the ideas or experiences that both of you have had around how do we create connections and break down the silos when it comes to child welfare.
Yeah. So I am not really sure how much more to say this or in different ways than how it's already been said today, just in the brief time we've been together, and how I want to make sure I pronounce her name right. Sharonda had said it yesterday multiple times if people got to listen to her share her story. But you don't need permission to be in a relationship with people and be in community with people. That's not something you need permission to do. That does not need to be written in policy. And so ways that we have just done it at Family Alternatives is, one, we have to be able to be authentic with how we approach our families, our bio families, our children, and putting on the table there. It's going to be hard. There's going to be very hard conversations. There's going to be hard interactions. We're talking about a system and child welfare that has a history of removing children from their home, removing brown and Black children from their home at a lot higher rates. And so sometimes we're going to have to be authentic in how we approach that, and naming the elephant in the room, if that's what you want to call it, that this is hard and we know it, and humanizing our bio families, humanizing our birth moms, humanizing their stories and their lives. They are the experts of their own lives, and listening to them.
I love that. I love that you said that. I think, one of the ways for me as a person that is I come into my work as a birth mom, and have been involved in the system, and so used to be looking down upon, so used to being judged, and understanding that that's not a very good space to try and work out a case plan. So being able to advocate for other families is something that's very, very important for me. Being invited to the table is big deal for me. I appreciate it. I think lived experience voice matters. And so when I'm at those tables, I always try to invite Kate. So like our QPI in somehow. So, we have meetings every Friday at the Law Center with the judges and the county attorneys and guardian ad litems that are involved in ICWA, and Kate comes to those so that she can bring the idea of QPI, not just me, but her as well, and inviting her to different things that we have in our community, different presentations. If it makes sense to have QPI there, having them be at the table so that people know that this is out there, because sometimes if you don't know, you don't know. I would have never have known if I didn't go to that birth parent, foster parent partnership. I would have never known about QPI and what was happening in this state. And it's such a good thing to have happen. It's, I know I keep saying it's best practices, but it's like really what's best for the family. It's best outcome for the children. And there's a mom, and I just was looking up I was just looking at her Facebook page, and now I just can't remember it. But she said at one of these meetings that every child deserves to keep everybody that they love in their lives. And, I think that's really important. For a child to have, and to know that they feel safe in a time where they have, are experiencing this extreme trauma of being removed from possibly everything that they know. School, their home, their friends, other family. So building those relationships and making sure that QPI can be at the table where it makes sense. And then being able to talk to since I get to do direct support with moms and dads, and I work with the attorneys that represent them, bringing up those conversations and saying, hey, have they had a comfort call? Have they been able to, talk with the foster family? Well, what if the foster family was able to be more involved, or would they want to come to a family care conference and, help support the birth parent and things like that?
And as you're talking, Shauna, I think parent mentorship is a hidden gem that is not well enough, maybe either understood or has been, curious about, or I don't know if this is a funding thing, but even thinking about that, right? You get to create connection and support both from like, I see you and understand, and let me help kind of translate into this world that is, if you haven't been in child welfare, and even if you are, like a staff in it, it still is like confusing and holds a lot of intensity to it. And so having a partner really is an important piece for us to be able to feel successful.
Thank you. Yes, I believe that it's really hard to prescribe a prescription if you haven't ever talked to the patient. And I feel like that's kind of sometimes the space that people come through when they're making policies or they're deciding what's going on in a case. Being able to actually have gone through the system, it's very... it's not always easy, but it's very helpful in helping other parents navigate so that they can be able to, understand life and figure out life on their own.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. And the other piece that you brought up, and now like my mind is running a blank, and it was going to be also just a beautiful little gem. It'll come back to me. But Carmel, is there anything that you want to reflect on with, either what you've shared or Shauna shared, or, just thinking about this, how do we create connection between parents in our role as a professional?
Yeah, I think what you said too, Kate, the word partnership, when you had said that, it like rang, my things were going off in my brain. Like, we are in a partnership as social workers, as child welfare workers, as judges, guardian ad litems. We're in a partnership with biological birth families when their children are in out-of-home placement. And so it's really about working with them. How are their kids going to reunify with them? How are their children and their kids going to reunify with them? And it's being in partnership. It's being in community, in relationship with them. And I just think about even just after that too, like after kids reunify, thinking of some of the other, you're starting with comfort calls, but then that comfort call allows us to continue those connections and continue those relationships with our families. And thinking about some of our foster families who call us every day and say, you'll never know who I just heard from. Guess who and that is about the start of, we started with being able to like tell our foster parents, it's okay for you to invite mom over for dinner one night after school. It's okay for mom to come to a doctor's appointment. That is building relationship and connection with them to allow them to, when their children do reunify, to know that they can still call you. They can still reach out to you. They can still send you pictures. And it's just, I really just think it's about being in partnership with our birth families.
Yeah. And both, Shauna and Carmela, you said there's an invitation component to it. Mm-hmm. Shauna, you gave the example of inviting me to those ICWA cabinet meetings, which I love. And I'm being able to like learn and be in perhaps a space that's less familiar. And how do we feel okay with a little bit of that, especially in the role of a worker, to feel okay being a little unfamiliar with what this may look like, but that, having that curiosity and maybe courage this time to show up in there and not be sort of in our typical space. Other ways, when you think about, and you said a few of them, Carmela, dinners and doctor's appointments, but ways to encourage, that connection between parent and a foster family. Are there other examples that you have had that has gone well as far as thinking about, what that may look like?
I just wanted to say, so imagine coming into a case plan as a birth parent, right? And you don't know who has your children. And you get to go meet them at some place and be supervised, and you notice, you don't like the way your child's hair done, or there's a bruise that you don't know about, or their clothes don't fit, or there's just all these complaints, and you call the social worker and they don't know. You ask the person who's supervising the visit and they don't know. How much could that be alleviated if that foster parent could say, oh my goodness, your kid came home from school today. The teacher said that they fell off the swing, or, little Johnny was, running and fell on the floor and he bruised his shin, or, and just those things that could be alleviated so that birth parent doesn't have to continue throughout their day or week until their next visitation, just letting those things just burn in the back of their head. Like, what's going on? Who has my kid? What's happening to them? How come nobody knows what's going on? And constantly complaining about something that could so easily be explained if there was that relationship right there. And that happens so many times. And I think it's really important that, those answers, are met or are being answered for families so that they can be, they don't have to worry about that, and they can focus on them, and they can focus on whatever they need to be doing. They can focus on their treatment plan, because every, family, every birth family loves their children, and it's shameful, and having them torn away from them it's traumatic. It's very, very traumatic, and it's very, very shameful. And so sometimes people think that nobody care, that we don't care when things happen to our children because, maybe we didn't take care of our mental health or our chemical dependency. And so we just don't care, but we really do. And we really want to know what's happening on those day-to-day basis. And when they show up, what's going on, and having that relationship. Oh, well, this is the size of clothes. I have a bunch at home if you need them, oh, well, I'm glad that explains that bruise, or, hey, this is the products that I use in their hair. This is how you can keep it managed. And this is, what's happening. And I think just those questions could be easily answered with the relationship between the birth and foster parent.
Yeah. And I think about this work can be very challenging, right? We all know that already as the individuals who work in child welfare every single day, whatever your role may be, this work can be challenging, but I don't think this part of the work has to be challenging. Right. Being able to build relationships with our birth families, that this part of the work doesn't have to be challenging. It is normal to be in a relationship with each other. I think about an example that we have at Family Alternatives. We have 2 little boys who reunified with their father. And every year we go to Valley Fair to celebrate our families at the end of the summer. And they get to bring all the kids who live in the home, any kids who are adopted, any kids in placement. And dad wanted to come. And they were already back living with dad, and their sister was still in the foster home. And dad wanted to come to Valley Fair with his boys, but there was a barrier where he couldn't afford it. He couldn't afford the parking and he couldn't afford the ticket. We don't want that to be a barrier for him. So guess what I did? I got on my phone and Venmoed dad money so he could put it in his bank account and be able to pay for parking and come to Valley Fair with his boys so that they could see their previous foster family, their previous younger people they lived with, and that they can see that it's okay for dad and our foster parents to like each other and to be in relationships and to go on this ride with us and love it with us. It's okay for that. There shouldn't be a barrier and it shouldn't be a challenge.
Can I give an example as well? So when my kids were in foster care, I stayed in a space. It was a Native American kind of shelter, sobriety home, but they allowed smoking in the space. I did not have supervised visits. I could have my kids, but I didn't have any place to take them. I didn't have a home. I was using a bus. And one of the spaces that the foster parent agreed to meet me was at the Shakopee powwow. And so that was out of the box. She got to come and see a piece of my culture, and I got to take my son to spaces that I took him in before. And I think those are things that you could do that could help, create cultural spaces and answer a lot of questions and give them a little bit of more understanding and some meaningfulness behind what's important to me and why it's important for my son to have those in his life. So that was an out-of-box thing that the foster parent did for me. And I think that was way before QPI. So I really did appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Shauna, I'm kind of looking at some of the questions on the chat, and I think someone had a question specific to specific resources and how we can keep children who are in out-of-home placement connected to those communities. And I love that example that you just provided. And for some of our foster families at FA, we've had families invite mom over for dinner, and mom cooks the meal. It's not the foster parent cooking. Mom is cooking the traditional Mexican meal. Darlene Bell would have been a great example to share this one, but she had children in her home who were of African culture, and she didn't know how to make their traditional food. So she went out into her community of people, of other adults, and said, I have these 3 children I'm caring for. I think it was actually four children I'm caring for. This is the kind of food they eat. I have no clue how to make it. Can you give me some recipes? Where should I go? And that is how it is about being in relationship in your communities as well, and researching and networking. That is how you do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, both lovely examples. Yeah, I was noticing some of the questions in the chat too. And I don't know, Shauna, if you want to tackle in this moment any specific resources for ICWA cases to help keep kids involved with their community and culture if family isn't available. So my guess is it's looking at a non-relative foster family and how to stay connected to culture and community.
Well, one, I think So in every case, there's always in ICWA, there's usually a tribal liaison that's at the table. And I think, and especially here in Minnesota, we have a wonderful Indigenous community, and we have a lot of community programs and community spaces. So I think, they hold different ceremonies. They have powwows. Usually school systems will have an Indian advocate, and they'll have powwows there. Not every school, but those are spaces that you could request, say, hey, listen, is there something in the community I can go to with mom or dad and bring the child with? And then asking the tribal rep, and then asking if you have that relationship with the birth parent, asking them, what is there that that's culturally specific that you would, enjoy doing that we can do together, or that, you want to keep, like if there's a ceremony that, a naming ceremony for your child that was supposed to come up and now we have CPS, being able to continue those traditions and, keeping cultural specific things in place is really important. So they can reach out to the tribal liaison. The best resource is the birth family, mom, dad, aunties, uncles, brothers and sisters. That's the best resource there. But there's a ton of things in the communities, in your school systems, and just go on their websites and look, and you'll get a flyer. You can call the ICWA Law Center and ask for one of the advocates or the paramentors or someone there, and see if there's something going on in the community. You can call probably any of the community agencies and say, hey, I'm a foster parent, and I just, I have some Native children here, and I just wanted to know what I can do to keep them involved in their spaces within their cultural identity, because keeping their cultural identity in place is very, very important, especially when it comes to the removal of Native American children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, circling back to the best person to ask is our parents and family and the youth themselves, depending on age. Like I do believe that a role of the foster parent is to advocate for what's best for the child in their home. And if they're saying, I really miss so-and-so and I want to be able to connect to them, like, yeah, let's try to make that happen, because that goes to like who I am. And that is important for all of us, and particularly for youth who have to experience out-of-home placement. There's a couple of questions. So, and there's a little bit of a theme that's coming up in the questions, looking at maybe wonderful, or great material and powerful stories, wondering how you might respond to the common system pushback, safety concerns, drug and alcohol issues. So that was a question that was in there. Also, one of a similar kind of like, what does it look like if a parent's actively using drugs or alcohol, and how do we stay positive? So I'm going to kind of lump those three together. We'll see if we can do that in a digestible way. But, thinking about, when there are these, Carmela, you alluded to it, like when there is going to be hard things that happen, and whether that is because, parents may still be utilizing protective responses that no longer work for them, like alcohol. Foster families might be using perspective or responses that aren't helpful in like staying a little guarded, or I've had this experience back then, I don't want to have it again. So thinking about, just what are some ways that, you've been able to sort of push past or step around, that stigma or fear or these, kind of conditions of uncertainty that create the silos versus breaking them down.
Well, so a lot of times when I share my story with people who are working in the system, I talk about how I came into the system. My son just recently passed away, but I had a 16-year-old son who was on special needs. He was in a wheelchair, quadriplegic, and nonverbal. And I was addicted, and I OD'd in a public park with him. And that's how I came into the system. And I spent 33 days in jail. And if I didn't have certain people who supported me in my community, because like I said, I didn't have birth family, I wouldn't be where I am today. And I think that people need to understand that everybody deserves support and everybody deserves another chance. And I think that coming from a space of judgment, if that's where you're coming from, maybe you should reconsider where being in this work, because it's hard and it's ugly, and there's a lot of letdowns and there's a lot of pain. But with the correct support, families can overcome addiction. They can overcome, or they can manage mental health. I think that I had that stigma on me for a very, very long time. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to get into this work, because so many people judge me. My social worker said she would not even give me my kids back. I got them back 2 weeks later. She wouldn't write me a letter for housing. I had people in my community do that for me, my tribal liaison, and I got my kids back 2 weeks later. And if I didn't have that support, I wouldn't be where I am today. So when you look at somebody and you judge them for, having an addiction or having mental health, just, understand that there's underlying issues. I didn't have family. I come from a lot of trauma. And I was lost as a single mom with, kids and a special needs kiddo. And, being able to meet them where they're at, and then to also just support them, just plain support. You don't need to, go over above and beyond, but not, if you call and you say, I'm not coming from a place of judgment, mean it, if you say that, because that person might feel only comfortable coming to you and saying, hey, this is happening and I feel bad, you know what I mean? And being able to just actually support them and say, well, that's what I do anyways in my job. I'm like, well, let's figure this out. Let's go get a Rule 25. Let's go do this. Let's call your social worker and let's just move forward. You can't look back. It's already happened. Let's just move forward. And I think that, support is when you say it, it sounds great, but it's really hard to do when you come from a space where you're holding these beautiful little babies and you see mom show up and they're, not in the best space. Just be patient and just continue to support them. I mean, that would be my advice, because judgment can make things go in a whole nother direction. But that's not a fun space to be in. So if you have families who are, showing, for instance, I was in a meeting with somebody and they were like, you know what, I took my foster kids to meet dad, and dad didn't show up 3 times in a row. He did not show up. And I had to listen to see those kids cry and listen to and answer questions that I didn't know why he didn't show up. And it's like, well, maybe dad's on a bus and coming from parenting, you know what I mean? And in a lot of places where you show up for visitation, if you don't show up within the first 10 minutes, your visit's canceled. So if there's anything that happens on your way from a bus trip to wherever, if your session goes a little longer in counseling, but you needed to stay there because it was deep, or if you missed your bus, or if there was a fight on the bus and you couldn't get there in time, you missed your thing. And you might not always have, in that instance, that foster dad did not have the ability to call dad, and that dad didn't have the ability to call foster dad. So they just didn't know. And it just built up this animosity between them. Well, being able to have that relationship being built would be good, so that, they could support them. But there are underlying reasons, and being patient and understanding, it's not always that somebody wants to mess up. It's just sometimes they're unseen circumstances. And also, addiction is a hard thing to overcome, and that requires a lot of patience, but it also requires a lot of support.
Mm-hmm. And I hear you say support, not fix.
Right.
And there is a difference in that. And sometimes I think just by nature, right, as helpers, as individuals who care about others, how much is it pulling us to try to fix something or someone versus how much can we give space? And, you're using a lot of patience, Shauna, which is true, but that space to allow support to unfold. And it might not look the way that we want, right? Mm-hmm. And there are true safety concerns that happen, outside of, the unforeseen circumstances, but it's like, how do I be with you in that in a way that still honors your humanity rather than making it try to be fixed. Like, yeah, we'll be ready and waiting next time.
Yep.
You know, if, you know, someone came, you know, under the influence to a visit or something, like, yeah, okay, I want to see you next time. I look forward to seeing you next time. You know, just the way even our language, I think, can be powerful, as you're alluding to. So, and
just think about how that message is sent to parents, birth dad, birth mom. We want to see you next time. Let's try next time. And instead of like shaming them, I spoke to a class last week, 40 students, and I had shared with them very similar to what Shauna had just said. If you're coming into this work, and they're students, if you're coming into this work with judgment right away, you're not going to be good at it. If you've been in this work for a long time and you're judging, you have to sit back and reflect on how you want to move forward and practice, because these are humans. We are all humans. These are people's lives, and many of them have a lot of things stacked against them. And so it is not about a fix. It's not about fixing an individual who might be struggling with chemical dependency. It's about how to support them. And that is, I think, where we get lost at, myself included as a social worker and as a former child who had parents who were addicted. I had a long addiction. But it's not about the fix. It's about how can we support these families and these moms and dads. Like Shauna said, she didn't have a birth family. She was doing it by herself, and she needed some support. And what does that support look like?
And for each other. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of my favorite things about QPI and this like adventure we're on together is that like we're on it together. And when you are in relationship with individuals who are out, who hold a different role or have different experience than you, it automatically widens your perspective. I have learned so much in this time with individuals, just being able to step back and listen and think about, oh, I hadn't thought about it in that way, right? Like if I'm looking straight ahead at the camera, I can see maybe a little something over here in my periphery, but if I turn my head and really like change my perspective, it allows me to see it differently. And I think that's one of the joys or the beauties that I've had in working with QPI and, you know, particularly my, you know, fellow champions here like Carmela and Shauna is just that, like being willing to be in relationship to better, you know, practice or do the work. And I know one of the questions that I want a quick answer is like, are we thinking QPI is a requirement? Will we push for it in Minnesota? And I just want to echo what Jennifer Rodriguez said, like, you know, not everyone has to sign on that dotted line of commitment. I would love to have that, but it's more so the essence of the practices, right? Are we thinking about relationships and we're holding those in the center? Are we, you know, thinking about what is developmentally a child needs when we're doing transitions? You know, a baby who spent 9 months in a foster family doesn't just, you know, have court, get reunified and go home the next day. Developmentally, you have now separated them from a person who was providing care 24/7. Like that is going to take a hit on their development. Like, are we making decisions based on that? And whose voice is at the table besides your own, right? Like, even thinking about like another tangible thing, you know, are foster families being invited into family group conference? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think they're supposed to, but are we always doing it, right? Are we making sure that phone call comes at a time that we can get a hold of them and why that they would be valued there, or attending court, or, you know, various things of that nature. So just thinking about a little stuff of that. I know we've got a little bit more time, and we can look into some of the other questions if, you know, Shauna and Carmela, you're willing to hang in for a few more minutes.
Yeah, for sure.
Of course.
All right. One question is, what is a simple everyday, every week practice that we can do to make our engagement with foster families and children in placement more genuine? What is an underrated practice in this area that you can think of as being helpful?
I think for myself, I mean, me and Shauna both do the work every single day. I'm working directly. I think the question was specific to foster families. Mm-hmm. I mean, I work directly with licensing foster homes every single day. So what a simple, I mean, I just think like it is so important to just humanize like relationships. And so like when I talk to my foster parent, I'm not just calling them on the phone to say things about the case or what's going on, but it's more so like also like, how are you doing today? Actually, how are you doing? So like, I think just being like authentic in your relationship with the foster parent is a nice practice that I do too, is also just checking in on them, besides like checking in on like their foster parenting in general, but like, how's your son if you have a son, or how was your mom? How was your trip? Just like, I think that also helps our foster parents. For me, I think for my experiences and family alternatives and how we practice with our foster families who are licensed with us, it's just so different and humanized. And they're also people too. And this is their life. They are letting, like Shauna had said, we're having strangers watch visits. Foster parents are letting strangers, initially, children are strangers to them when they enter their home, strangers entering their home. So just checking and asking, how are they doing? What do you need from us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Shauna, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, after being a part of QPI and building good relationships with a lot of foster families and seeing what they're going through on their end has really opened up my eyes. And I don't know if QPI is doing it, but I know we talked about, being able to have a support system for foster families to be able to talk with one another, I think is important. I think everything should be, they're going to need support as well, just as much as birth parents are going to need support. So nothing works if only one side is supported and the other side is not. So being able to support both families is good. Like Mila said, checking in on them. Sorry, my computer is dying. But checking in on them, making sure that they're okay, and having conversations. I think that's one of the things that I'll probably have conversations with my moms and dads that I work with. Just asking, do you ever ask the foster family how they're doing, or if they need anything from you? Like if they need you to, record that voicemail or record that message for the child for bedtime, or if there's a book that they have at home that you used to read to them all the time, being able to make sure that they're checking in as well, I think is something that I really am going to start doing with my families. I know that they have a lot on their case plan, but if they do truly have that relationship, having the support on both ends is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And let's not forget about like a little fun and joy and play, I don't know if you do this, Carmela, but when I, supported foster families in a more direct way like that, like, are we playing board games, a card game? Hey, I got this new trick, whatever it might be, just to like allow a little the pleasant in, there's a lot of compliance, and because there needs to be in systems, but how do we also have, maybe some creativity that can be coupled into that. It's not just about the discomfort and the unpleasant and but like, where is there little moments of joy to be mutually shared? Yeah. And so, looking at that as important things. And so there are a couple other questions, and I know Stacy said that we would be able to answer them and provide that, which I know that we would all be willing to do. And I would just love to say thank you for taking your time. Thank you for sticking around. And, hopefully you've walked away with, some ideas around, how do I look at relationships? How do I think about what is it that the child and the family and I need for support? Because it really is about all of us. Carmela, any last thoughts?
Yeah, one of my last thoughts is, it's actually funny. I'm trying to not to multitask, but my coworker is like texting me and she's saying, there's always a safe way to be in connection with our families. I know there was a couple things where people were saying, what if it's not safe? There's always a safe way. We are living in a world of virtual communication now. There's so many ways to be safe with our families, if that's something they're struggling with in the moment. And so that's kind of my ending. And you also have to think outside the box. Be creative in your practice. Be creative in your work. Yeah.
I love that. And it's true, right? There are always ways to figure. It might not look maybe the way, but that's where the box comes in, right? Mm-hmm. You just stepping right outside of it. So Shauna, any final words or thoughts?
I just want to say, and Minnesota has 11 different tribes. And when you have Native children in your home, their culture is their identity. So being able to think outside of the box, being able to do things that are culturally specific with their families, like you mentioned, having fun playing board games, maybe attending a powwow at a school, maybe going to things like learning how to make a ribbon skirt if you have a little Native girl in your home, or just things that you can think of outside of the box that you can do with the family that could be culturally specific is really important. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Kate and Shanna and Carmela for the wonderful panel today. The audience can reach out directly to QPI Minnesota with the website and the email on the screen here. So please feel free to reach out. We didn't get to several questions. And like I said, we're going to create a document, like a parking lot question document that we will ask the panelists to follow up with some of these questions and then send out to the audience for access. But then again, if you want to reach out directly, you are welcome to do so and then explore their website. Thank you again, Kate, Carmela, and Shanna.